"Don't sign that contract," warned the human janitor, the alien billionaire, froze and canceled. David Mercer's muscles strained as he pushed the industrial cleaning cart down the pristine hallway of Stellar Apex Corporation. 3 weeks into his new job as a janitor at the galaxy's largest alien conglomerate, and he still marveled at the building's impossible architecture. Gleaming surfaces that seemed to defy gravity and corridors that stretched toward infinity. "Another day in paradise," he muttered, adjusting his dark blue uniform that hugged his athletic frame a bit too snugly. The company-issued outfit was clearly designed with alien proportions in mind. The pay was decent, though. After the economic collapse back on Earth and the subsequent integration into the Galactic Alliance, humans were scrambling for any off-world employment they could find. David had lucked out, or so he thought. He paused his cart outside the executive wing, checking his schedule. This section housed the offices of the corporation's highest echelon, including its enigmatic CEO, Livia Navarex. David had glimpsed her only twice since starting. A tall, imposing figure with sky-blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the artificial lighting, and snow-white hair always pulled back in an immaculate style that accentuated her alien features. "Hey, Earthling!" The gruff voice belonged to Krex, a burly Tarian security guard with mottled green skin. "You're early for this sector." David shrugged. "Schedule change. Got the memo this morning." The guard grunted, checking his tablet. "Right. Just keep your eyes down and your mouth shut. Ms. Navarex has important visitors today." "Always do," David replied, though that wasn't entirely true. He'd developed a habit of observing everything around him, a survival skill from his previous life that he wasn't eager to explain. As he worked his way through the wing, methodically cleaning each office, David's ears perked up at the sound of raised voices coming from the main conference room. The door was slightly ajar, unusual for such a high-security area. "The human markets are ripe for exploitation," came a deep rumbling voice. "Their governments are fragmented, desperate for investment. And Navarex has no idea what these assets are actually worth," added another voice, higher-pitched and nasal. "By the time she realizes what she signed away, the transfer will be irreversible." David slowed his movements, positioning his cart to block any view of him through the gap in the door. "The contract is airtight. Once she signs, Earth's mineral rights in the Proxima system transfer to our consortium. We're talking quintillions in rare Earth elements." David's blood ran cold. Proxima Centauri was humanity's first colonial success, the pride of Earth's expansion efforts. If these rights were signed away, "She'll be here any minute," the nasal voice continued. "Remember, not a word about the clause on page 94. That's where we've hidden the real meat." The janitor's mind raced. He wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to hear this. Getting involved could cost him his job, or worse, considering how corporate espionage was handled in galactic law. But those were his people they were talking about, his species. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hall, the distinctive click of Livia Navarex's heels against the polished floor. David had seconds to decide. As she rounded the corner, the CEO was a vision of corporate power. Her tailored black leather business suit with sharp shoulder accents contrasting dramatically with her blue skin. 2 assistants trailed behind her, carrying data tablets. Their eyes met briefly as she approached the conference room. David saw something unexpected there. Not the cold calculation he'd anticipated, but a flash of curiosity. The moment passed. She nodded curtly to her security detail and reached for the door. David's body moved before his brain could catch up. "Ms. Navarex," he called out, abandoning his cart and stepping forward. The security guard's hand immediately went to his weapon. "Stand down, human." But David persisted, his heart hammering. "Please, you need to hear this. Those executives in there, they're planning to scam you. There's something hidden in the contract about Earth's mineral rights in Proxima." The hallway fell silent. Livia Navarex stood frozen, her hand still on the door handle, those piercing eyes now fully focused on David. "What did you say?" Her voice was soft but carried an undercurrent of steel. "Page 94, David continued, aware he was crossing every professional boundary. "They're hiding something there. I overheard them talking about exploiting human markets and tricking you into signing away rights worth quintillions." The security guard grabbed David's shoulder roughly. "That's enough. "You're fired, human, and probably headed for a detention center." But Livia raised one delicate blue hand, stopping the guard. "Wait." She studied David with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing through him, past the janitor's uniform to something deeper. "Bring him," she said finally, gesturing to her security. "I want to hear what he knows." And with that simple command, David Mercer's life as an ordinary janitor came to an abrupt end. "Bring him in," Livia commanded, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. The security guard's grip on David's shoulder tightened painfully as he was marched into the conference room. Inside, 5 alien executives sat around a gleaming obsidian table. Their expressions shifted from surprise to outrage at the sight of a human janitor entering their private meeting. "Ms. Navarex, what is the meaning of this?" demanded a corpulent Vexorian with mottled purple skin. His jowls quivered with indignation. "This is highly irregular." Livia's posture remained impeccable as she took her position at the head of the table, not yet sitting. "Gentlemen, this human has brought something concerning to my attention." Her voice was cool, controlled. "Something about page 94 of our contract." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. David watched as the aliens exchanged quick glances. "A janitor?" The nasal-voiced Saurian that David had overheard earlier gave a dismissive laugh. "Surely you don't take the word of maintenance staff over your potential business partners?" David felt all eyes on him, some curious, others hostile. Livia's gaze, however, held something different. Behind her professional demeanor, he sensed a keen intelligence assessing him. "I believe in verifying all information, regardless of its source," Livia replied smoothly. She turned to David. "Please, tell these gentlemen exactly what you heard." David straightened his shoulders, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his janitor's uniform. "I overheard them discussing hidden clauses regarding Earth's mineral rights in the Proxima system. They specifically mentioned page 94 and said once you signed, the transfer would be irreversible." The Vexorian's complexion darkened to a deeper purple. "This is a slander. He's clearly been planted by one of our competitors." "A simple matter to resolve," Livia said, extending her hand toward one of her assistants. "The contract, please." As the assistant handed over the thick document, David noticed a subtle tremor in the Saurian's spindly fingers. Livia began flipping through the pages with deliberate slowness, her eyes never leaving the faces of her would-be partners. "Page 94, she murmured, finding the section. Her eyes narrowed as she read, the room falling into tense silence. After a long moment, she looked up. "Interesting. This clause appears to transfer not just mining rights, but full territorial sovereignty of the Proxima system to your consortium." Her voice remained calm, but David detected a dangerous edge. "A rather significant detail to omit from our discussions." "A standard legal formality," the Saurian replied quickly. "It doesn't change the substance of our agreement, doesn't it?" Livia placed the contract down and walked slowly around the table. "Because it seems to me that acquiring territorial sovereignty over humanity's first colonial system would be quite the coup for your consortium." David watched her move with the grace of a predator, noting how the executives seemed to shrink in their seats as she approached. "Perhaps our human friend could explain the significance," Livia suggested, stopping beside David. She was close enough that he caught the faint scent of something exotic, like night-blooming flowers with an electric undertone. David cleared his throat. "Proxima Centauri is more than just a mining operation. It's humanity's first successful interstellar colony. It represents our species' future among the stars." "Precisely," Livia said, her eyes never leaving the aliens. "And you thought I wouldn't notice this small detail buried in legal jargon?" The Vexorian stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. We'll take our business elsewhere." "I think not," Livia replied, pressing a button on the table. The doors sealed with a soft hiss. "Corporate fraud is a serious offense under Galactic Alliance law. My security team will escort you to a holding area while we contact the proper authorities." The room erupted into chaos. The Saurian lunged across the table, reaching for the contract, while the others shouted protests and threats. Security personnel flooded in through a side door. In the commotion, David noticed a small object slide from the Vexorian's sleeve, a weapon. Without thinking, he moved, tackling Livia just as a pulse of energy scorched the wall where she had been standing. They landed hard on the floor, David's body covering hers protectively. For a breathless moment, their faces were inches apart, his weight pressed against her. Despite the danger, David became acutely aware of the softness of her body beneath his, the warmth of her breath against his face. Livia's eyes widened, not with fear but with something more primal, surprise and perhaps a flicker of desire. The moment stretched between them, electric in charge, even as security subdued the attacking aliens. "Are you hurt?" David asked, his voice rougher than intended. "No," she replied, her typically composed voice slightly breathless. "You have impressive reflexes for a janitor." Their eyes remained locked, neither making a move to separate despite the chaos around them. David became aware of her hand resting against his chest, feeling his rapid heartbeat through the thin fabric of his uniform. "I'm beginning to think there's more to you than meets the eye, David Mercer," Livia said softly, using his name for the first time. The security chief approached, clearing his throat awkwardly. "The situation is contained, Ms. Navarex." David finally rolled away, helping Livia to her feet. As she smoothed her impeccable suit, he noticed a slight tremble in her fingers, the only indication that the attack had affected her. "Take them to holding," she ordered, her professional demeanor returning, "and contact Alliance Security immediately." As the conspirators were led away, Livia turned back to David. "It seems I owe you twice now. First for the warning, and now for my life." Her eyes traveled over him with new interest. "I believe we should continue this conversation in my office." The invitation hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. The journey to Livia's private office felt surreal to David. Just hours ago, he had been anonymously mopping floors. Now he was being escorted through executive quarters by the CEO herself. Livia's office occupied the entire top floor of the Eastern Tower, a breathtaking space with transparent walls offering a panoramic view of the capital city's skyline. As the door sealed behind them, she gestured toward a sitting area of low-curved furniture. "Please make yourself comfortable," she said, her professional tone softening slightly. "I believe we have much to discuss." David settled onto a couch that seemed to mold itself to his body. "I'm guessing janitors don't usually get invited up here." A hint of a smile played at the corners of Livia's mouth. "No, they don't." Neither do they typically tackle corporate executives or thwart multi-trillion credit fraud attempts. She studied him with those penetrating eyes. "Who are you really, David Mercer?" Before he could answer, a discreet chime sounded. Livia frowned, tapping a hidden control panel on her desk. A holographic display materialized, showing her security chief's concerned face. "Ms. Navarex, we have a situation. The detainees activated some kind of silent alarm before we confiscated their devices. Our systems have detected multiple unauthorized vessels approaching the building." David tensed, instinctively scanning the room for defensive positions and exits. "Initiate lockdown protocol," Livia ordered calmly, "and evacuate non-essential personnel." "Already underway, ma'am." "But there's more. We've detected intrusion attempts in our security network. I recommend you move to the safe room immediately." The display winked out. Livia turned to David, her expression grave. "It seems our conversation will have to wait." "Those weren't ordinary businessmen," David said, rising to his feet. "This is a coordinated attack." Livia moved to her desk, pressing her palm against a hidden scanner. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow corridor. "This way." As they hurried through the passage, David found himself admiring her composure under pressure. "You don't seem particularly surprised by all this." "This isn't the first attempt to undermine my company," she replied, her voice tight, "though it is the most brazen." The passage ended at a reinforced door that opened into a compact but well-equipped safe room. Multiple screens displayed security feeds from throughout the building. "What aren't you telling me?" David asked as the door sealed behind them. Livia's shoulders dropped slightly, the first sign of vulnerability he'd seen from her. "There's a faction within the Galactic Alliance that opposes human integration. They believe your species is unpredictable, dangerous, and they're willing to attack the headquarters of the galaxy's largest corporation to prove that point." It's more complicated. She turned to face him fully. My company has been at the forefront of human-alien cooperation. The Proxima deal would have been the largest human-alien joint venture in history. The real deal, not the fraudulent one you expose. David processed this information, pieces falling into place. So this isn't just about business. It's about preventing human advancement in the galactic community. Precisely. Livia's eyes narrowed as she studied one of the screens. They're inside the building. David moved closer to view the feed, acutely aware of her proximity. The scent of her, that electric floral fragrance, momentarily distracted him. You still haven't answered my question, she said softly. Who are you, David? You move like someone with military training. He met her gaze. Former Earth Defense Force intelligence. After the war, I wanted something simpler. A janitor? There was no mockery in her tone, only curiosity. Honest work, invisible work. He shrugged. Until today. A loud explosion rocked the building, causing the lights to flicker. One of the screens showed armed mercenaries storming through a lower level. They're being thorough, David observed grimly. They want me dead, Livia said matter-of-factly. And now you as well, I imagine. Their eyes met, and in that moment of shared danger, something shifted between them. The professional barriers that had separated CEO from janitor seemed suddenly meaningless. I won't let that happen, David said, his voice low and intense. Livia stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her blue skin. Why risk your life for me? You barely know me. Maybe I'm just fulfilling the human stereotype of being unpredictable, he replied with a half-smile. To his surprise, she laughed, a genuine melodious sound that transformed her face. Perhaps there's truth to the stereotype after all. Another explosion, closer this time. The security feeds began to go dark one by one. They're cutting through our systems, Livia said, her professional demeanor returning. She moved to a cabinet and retrieved 2 sleek weapons, offering one to David. I assume you remember how to use this? He took the pulse pistol, checking its charge with practiced ease. Some skills you don't forget. My security team will hold them off, but we need an exit strategy. She activated a hidden panel revealing a detailed building schematic. The executive shuttle bay is 2 levels down, if we can reach it. We'll be targets the moment we leave the building, David interrupted. They'll have air support waiting. Livia's eyes met his again, and he saw something new there. Not just determination or fear, but a spark of admiration. What do you suggest? Something unpredictable, he replied, studying the schematic. Something human. As he outlined his plan, Livia moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his. The contact sent an electric current through him that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the growing attraction between them. That's either brilliant or suicidal, she said when he finished. That's humanity in a nutshell, David replied with a grim smile. The final security feed flickered out. They were now blind to the approaching threat. Livia's hand found his in the dimmed light of the safe room. Her touch was surprisingly warm, her skin softer than he had imagined. If we don't make it through this... David squeezed her hand gently. We will. For a heartbeat, they stood connected by that simple touch. The air between them charged with unspoken possibilities, a promise of what might come if they survived the next few hours. Then the safe room's outer defenses began to sound their warning, and the moment passed. It was time to fight. The waste disposal system. Livia's elegant brows arched in disbelief. You want us to escape through the garbage? David couldn't help but smile at her expression. Trust me, it's the last place they'll look for the CEO of Stellar Apex. Plus, I know those systems inside out. Of course you do, Livia muttered, but there was a hint of admiration in her voice. Lead on, Janitor. The safe room's secondary exit led to a narrow maintenance corridor. David moved ahead, pulse pistol ready, his senses heightened by the danger and by Livia's presence behind him. Every few seconds, distant explosions rocked the building. 3 levels down is the central waste processing hub, David explained in a hushed voice. From there, we can access the service tunnels that lead to the underground transport network. And you learned all this in 3 weeks of employment? Livia asked skeptically. David glanced back at her with a half smile. First rule of intelligence work, always know your exits. They reached a service elevator, little more than a metal platform with safety rails. David pried open the control panel and bypassed the security lockdown. Impressive, Livia murmured, standing close enough that he could feel her breath on his neck. The platform descended shakily. David was acutely aware of how Livia's body swayed with the motion, occasionally brushing against his. Despite the life-threatening situation, he found himself distracted by these brief contacts. "Your species continues to surprise me," she said softly. "Most beings would be paralyzed with fear right now." "Humans tend to function well under pressure," David replied. "It's one of our better qualities." "What are your others?" The question carried a subtle undertone that made David's pulse quicken. Before he could answer, the elevator jerked to a halt between floors. Emergency lights bathed them in a soft red glow. "They've cut the power to non-essential systems," Livia said, her professional demeanor returning. David assessed their position. "We're close enough." He pointed to a maintenance hatch in the ceiling. "That should lead to a ventilation shaft that connects to the waste system." With practiced efficiency, he climbed onto the railing and pushed the hatch open. Then he turned, offering his hand to Livia. "Ladies first." She took his hand, her skin cool and smooth against his. As he helped her up, their bodies pressed together momentarily. Even through the chaos and danger, the contact sent a jolt of electricity between them. Once inside the ventilation shaft, they crawled through the narrow space. David led the way, guided by his mental map of the building's infrastructure. "I never imagined I'd be crawling through air ducts with a janitor when I woke up this morning," Livia commented dryly. "Former intelligence officer," David corrected. "Who chose to become a janitor," she countered. "That's the intriguing part." They reached a junction where the shaft widened. David paused, allowing Livia to catch up beside him. "After the war, I needed something uncomplicated," he admitted. "No life or death decisions. No responsibility for others." "How's that working out for you?" Livia asked, a hint of teasing in her voice despite their predicament. Their eyes met in the dim light, and David felt something shift between them, a moment of genuine connection amid the chaos. "I'm beginning to remember what I've been missing," he said softly. The moment was broken by a distant explosion, closer than the previous ones. They continued their journey through the labyrinthine ventilation system until they reached a larger vertical shaft. "This is it," David said, peering down into the darkness. "The main waste chute. It leads directly to the processing level." Livia looked dubiously at the dark opening. "You're sure about this?" "Reasonably sure," David replied with a grin that he hoped projected more confidence than he felt. "Wonderful," she muttered. "If we survive this, I'm giving my entire maintenance staff a raise." David secured his weapon and prepared for the descent. "It's about a 30-foot drop to the collection chamber. The waste is processed every hour, so we should have..." He checked the time. "About 20 minutes before the next cycle. And if we don't make it out by then, let's just say we'll be very clean, very dead recycled material." Livia's laugh surprised him, a genuine sound of amusement despite their dire circumstances. "You humans and your gallows humor." "It's how we cope," David replied, finding himself drawn to the sound of her laughter. "Ready?" She nodded, her white hair catching the dim emergency lighting. For a CEO facing assassination, she was remarkably composed. "Together?" she suggested, moving closer to him at the edge of the chute. David nodded, and they positioned themselves side by side at the opening. His arms circled her waist naturally, pulling her against him. The contact was electrifying, her body firm yet yielding against his. "On three," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "1, 2. They plunged into darkness together, the rush of air drowning out his count of 3. The chute curved gradually, slowing their descent as they slid along its smooth surface. David kept his arm tight around Livia. Their bodies pressed together as they spiraled downward. The journey lasted only seconds, but in the darkness, with Livia's body against his, time seemed to stretch. They landed with a soft thud in a large collection chamber, thankfully empty of actual waste. They lay tangled together for a moment, catching their breath. Livia was half on top of him, her face inches from his. In the dim blue emergency lighting, her skin seemed to glow from within, her eyes wide and bright. "Are you hurt?" David asked, suddenly aware of their intimate position. "No," she replied, making no immediate move to separate from him. "Your plan is unorthodox, but effective." Her weight on him, the softness of her body, the scent of her skin, all combined to make David acutely conscious of their proximity. Despite the danger pursuing them, he found himself reluctant to move. "Unorthodox is what humans do best," he said, his voice low. Something flickered in Livia's eyes, a heat that matched what David felt building inside him. For a breathless moment, it seemed she might close the small distance between their lips. Instead, she gracefully disentangled herself and stood, offering him a hand up. But the look that passed between them held a promise. A conversation postponed, not abandoned. "Let's survive this first," she said softly. "Then we can explore human unorthodoxy." The waste processing level stretched before them. A vast, dimly lit space filled with machinery that hummed with dormant energy. David checked his timepiece. 17 minutes until the next processing cycle, he warned. "We need to reach the service tunnels before then?" Livia nodded, her composure remarkable for someone who had just slid down a garbage chute. She reached into a concealed pocket in her suit and withdrew a small disc-shaped device. "What's that?" David asked as they moved cautiously through the shadows. "Secure communication module," she replied, activating it with a touch. "If this is what I suspect, a corporate takeover attempt, I need to contact my allies on the board." David raised an eyebrow. "You were prepared for something like this?" "When you run the galaxy's largest corporation, you make powerful enemies." Her fingers danced across the device's holographic interface, especially when you pursue policies they disagree with, like human-alien cooperation. They reached a junction where the processing room opened into a wider area with multiple exits. David was about to suggest a route when he heard voices, the distinctive guttural tones of Krell mercenaries. "Down," he whispered, pulling Livia behind a large filtration tank. They crouched together in the narrow space, bodies pressed against each other. David could feel Livia's heartbeat, faster than a human's but steady. Her breath warmed his neck as they listened to the approaching patrol. "Sweep the entire level," one mercenary growled. "They couldn't have gone far." "Why would they come down here?" another complained. "It stinks of human waste." "Because humans are filthy creatures," the first replied with disgust. "They feel at home in garbage." David felt Livia's hand squeeze his arm, a silent gesture of solidarity that touched him unexpectedly. The patrol moved closer, forcing them to press deeper into their hiding spot. The space was so tight that Livia was practically in his lap, her back against his chest. "Check behind those tanks," ordered the lead mercenary. David tensed, ready to fight. But at that moment, Livia's communication device lit up with a response, casting a faint blue glow. She quickly covered it, but not before the light had flickered briefly. "What was that?" The mercenary's voice sharpened. "I saw something." Heavy footsteps approached their hiding place. David met Livia's eyes in the darkness, an unspoken plan forming between them. She nodded almost imperceptibly. As the mercenary rounded the tank, David exploded into action, tackling the alien while Livia rolled in the opposite direction, drawing her weapon. The surprised Krell went down hard, but his companions immediately opened fire. Energy bolts sizzled through the air as David and Livia separated, using the machinery for cover. David fired back, his shots precise despite the chaos. 2 mercenaries fell, but more were converging on their position. "There's too many," David called out, ducking as a bolt scorched the metal above his head. "This way." Livia had reached a small access door, partially hidden behind a processing unit. She punched a code into the panel beside it, and the door slid open. David provided covering fire as they retreated into the narrow passage beyond. The door sealed behind them just as the mercenaries reached it, their angry shouts muffled by the thick metal. The passage was barely wide enough for one person. Emergency lighting cast everything in a soft blue glow that complemented Livia's skin, making her appear almost luminescent. "Maintenance access tunnel," she explained as they moved forward. "It leads to a secure storage area." "You seem to know your way around the building's underbelly," David observed. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I make it a point to know every inch of my company, including the parts most executives never see." The tunnel ended at another sealed door. Livia entered another code, and they entered a small, circular chamber lined with storage containers. "We should be safe here temporarily," she said, checking her communication device. "They won't have the access codes for this section." David secured the door behind them, while Livia reviewed the messages on her device. Her expression darkened. "It's as I suspected," she said grimly. "This attack is being coordinated by the Hegemony Consortium, a group of corporations opposed to my company's human integration policies. They're attempting a hostile takeover while eliminating me in the process." "And me as collateral damage," David added dryly. "You've become a symbol," Livia explained, her eyes meeting his. "A human who saved an alien executive from being deceived. It contradicts their narrative that humans are untrustworthy and dangerous." "So what's the plan?" David asked, moving closer to her. The chamber was small enough that they were never more than an arm's length apart. "My security chief is organizing a counteroffensive," she replied. "But we need to reach the executive transport bay on sublevel 3. From there, we can access my private shuttle." David nodded, calculating routes in his mind. "We'll need to cross 2 more processing sectors and avoid patrols. It won't be easy." Livia's communication device chimed softly. She read the message, her expression shifting to one of concern. "They've disabled the main power grid. Life support systems are on emergency power." "How long?" 6 hours at most." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the blue emergency lighting. "If they can't find us, they'll try to flush us out by making the building uninhabitable." The reality of their situation settled over them. Trapped in a small chamber with limited time and mercenaries hunting them, the danger should have been foremost in David's mind, but he found himself increasingly aware of Livia's proximity, the way her suit hugged her curves, the subtle fragrance that was uniquely hers. She must have sensed his thoughts because her eyes lingered on his face. "You're remarkably calm for someone facing death." "Not the first time," he replied with a half-smile, "though the company is definitely better than usual." A hint of color darkened her blue cheeks. "Is flirtation a standard human response to life-threatening situations?" "It's one of our more enjoyable coping mechanisms," David admitted. He stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Does it bother you?" "No," she said softly. "It's, intriguing. My species tends to become more reserved in danger." "And what does your species do when they're attracted to someone?" The words left his mouth before he could reconsider them. The chamber suddenly seemed much smaller, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Livia's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't back away. "We're typically more deliberate than the humans are rumored to be," she replied, her voice lower than before. "But I've always been curious about human impulsiveness." David's heart raced as he closed the remaining distance between them. Maybe some stereotypes exist for a reason. Their faces were inches apart now, the danger momentarily forgotten as something more primal took precedence. Livia's lips parted slightly, an invitation David couldn't resist. The communication device chimed again, shattering the moment. Livia stepped back, professional composure returning as she checked the message. "My security team has secured a path to sublevel 3, she announced, though her voice wasn't quite steady. "We have a narrow window to reach them." David nodded, forcing his mind back to their survival. But as they prepared to leave their temporary sanctuary, the look that passed between them held a clear promise. Their interrupted moment would be revisited when circumstances allowed. The journey to sublevel 3 was a tense affair of ducking through maintenance corridors and service tunnels. David led the way, his military training evident in every cautious movement, while Livia followed closely, her communication device providing updates from her security team. "We're approaching the rendezvous point," David whispered as they reached a junction in the tunnels. "Your security chief said they'd meet us at access point C7. Livia nodded, checking the small holographic map projected from her device. "It should be just ahead. Terran is one of my most trusted officers. He's been with me since I founded the company." They moved forward cautiously, the blue emergency lighting casting long shadows. David's instincts were on high alert. Something felt off. though he couldn't pinpoint what. The access point came into view, a reinforced door with a security panel. Livia stepped forward to enter her code when David gently caught her wrist. Wait, he murmured, his eyes scanning the corridor. Something's not right. Livia gave him a questioning look, but trusted his judgment enough to pause. What is it? Your security team should have someone posted here already, David explained, his voice low. Standard protocol for a high-value extraction? Understanding dawned in Livia's eyes. She checked her device again, frowning. The last message from Terran said they were in position 10 minutes ago. David drew his weapon, motioning for Livia to stay behind him as he approached the door cautiously. Using the reflective surface of a nearby pipe, he peered around the corner and immediately pulled back. Ambush, he whispered. At least 6 mercenaries waiting on the other side. Livia's expression hardened. How? This access point isn't on any public schematics. Someone gave them your security codes, David said grimly. You have a traitor in your inner circle. The realization hit Livia visibly, a flash of hurt quickly masked by determination. She checked her device one more time, scrolling through the messages with new suspicion. These communications? She murmured. The syntax isn't quite right for Terran. I didn't notice before, because of the urgency, but now... They've either compromised him or he's the traitor, David concluded. Either way, we can't trust any of the extraction plans. Livia's jaw tightened. Then we make our own plan. She pulled up a detailed schematic of the building. The central security hub is 2 levels above us. If we can reach it, I can override the building systems and lock out the intruders. That's not an escape plan, David pointed out. That's a counterattack. A fierce smile curved Livia's lips. I didn't build the largest corporation in the galaxy by running from threats, David. The determination in her eyes stirred something in him. Admiration, certainly, but also a deepening attraction to this woman who refused to be victimized. We'll need to access the central elevator shaft, she continued, studying the schematic. It bypasses the occupied floors and leads directly to the security level. Which will also be heavily guarded, David added. Yes, but they won't expect us to be heading up instead of out. Livia's eyes met his, bright with strategic calculation. Sometimes the best defense is a bold offense. David couldn't help but smile. That sounds surprisingly human of you. Perhaps you're rubbing off on me, she replied, a hint of flirtation in her tone despite their dire situation. They backtracked through the tunnels, taking a different route toward the central core of the building. As they moved, Livia explained her plan to retake control of the building's systems. Once we secure the hub, I can activate the emergency protocols, she said. It will seal off sections of the building, trapping the mercenaries in isolated groups that can be dealt with individually. And what about the traitor? David asked. Livia's expression darkened. The security hub records all communications. We'll identify exactly who sold us out. They reached a maintenance access point for the central elevator shaft, a narrow door that opened onto a vast vertical tunnel stretching up and down through the heart of the building. The security level is 8 floors up, Livia said, examining the service ladder built into the shaft wall. We'll need to climb. David checked his weapon's charge, still at 60%. I'll go first. The climb was arduous, made more challenging by the need for silence. Several times they froze in place as elevator cars rushed past, the displaced air threatening to tear them from the ladder. Halfway up, they paused on a small maintenance platform to rest. Pressed close together in the confined space, David became acutely aware of Livia's proximity, the warmth of her body, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she caught her breath. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of the building. David nodded, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "Why did you really take a job as a janitor? A man with your skills could have found more suitable employment." The question caught him off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because he found himself wanting to give her the honest answer. "After the war, I needed anonymity," he admitted. "I'd seen too much, done too much. Being invisible, just another human in a uniform, it was peaceful." Livia studied him with those penetrating eyes. "And now, Still craving invisibility? David found himself reaching out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of white hair from her face. Not at the moment, no. The air between them charged with tension, not from danger but from desire. Livia leaned into his touch, her skin warm beneath his fingertips. We should keep moving, she whispered, though she made no immediate move to pull away. We should, David agreed, equally motionless. For a heartbeat, they remained suspended in the moment, the attraction between them almost palpable. Then, with visible reluctance, Livia straightened and turned back to the ladder. They resumed their climb in silence, though something had shifted between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of what would come when danger no longer pressed so closely. They reached the security level without incident and carefully exited the shaft into another maintenance corridor. According to Livia's schematic, the security hub was just ahead, likely guarded by the traitor's accomplices. How do you want to play this? David asked, checking his weapon one final time. Livia's expression was resolute. No more sneaking. This is my company and I'm taking it back. She reached into another hidden pocket in her suit and withdrew a small metallic sphere. Sonic disruptor. It will incapacitate anyone within 20 feet without causing permanent damage. David raised an eyebrow, impressed. You come prepared. A CEO in my position needs to be, she replied with a hint of a smile. Ready? He nodded, positioning himself beside the door to the main corridor. On three. Their eyes met one last time before the assault. A look that contained not just determination for the coming fight, but a promise for what would follow. 1, 2, 3. The sonic disruptor did its work perfectly, dropping 4 mercenary guards to the floor in a writhing confusion. David moved swiftly, securing their weapons while Livia accessed the security hub's main console. I'm overriding the lockdown protocols, she announced, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Once I have control, we can isolate the remaining intruders. David kept his weapon trained on the entrance. Any sign of your security chief? Not yet, but Livia froze, her eyes widening as she stared at the screen. It's worse than we thought. Taryn didn't just betray me. He's been working with the Hegemony Consortium for years, feeding them information about all my human integration initiatives. David moved to her side, studying the communications log she'd uncovered. He's been systematically undermining every human-alien partnership your company has developed. And I trusted him completely, Livia said, her voice tight with controlled fury. She straightened, refocusing on the task at hand. I'm activating the emergency containment systems now. Throughout the building, heavy security doors began sliding into place, sealing off sections and trapping the mercenaries in isolated groups. Livia activated the internal communication system. Attention all Stellar Apex personnel. This is CEO Livia Navarex. The building is under attack by hostile forces. Security protocols have been activated. Remain in your secure areas until the all-clear is given. She switched to the security channel. All loyal security personnel, this is Navarex. Security Chief Taryn is a confirmed traitor. Detain him on site. Proceed with containment protocols for all hostile forces. As Livia coordinated the counteroffensive, David monitored the security feeds, tracking the mercenaries' movements. They're being rounded up floor by floor, he reported. Your people are good. The best, Livia agreed, a hint of pride in her voice. Except for the ones who betray me, apparently. A new alert flashed on the main screen. Movement in the corridor outside the hub. David tensed, positioning himself between Livia and the door. Someone's coming, he warned. The door slid open to reveal Taryn, his blue skin several shades darker than Livia's, his massive frame filling the doorway. His eyes widened in surprise at finding them there, then narrowed in cold calculation. Livia, he said smoothly, I've been looking everywhere for you. Thank the stars you're safe. Save it, Taryn, Livia replied, her voice like ice. I've seen the communications logs. I know you're working for the Hegemony? The security chief's expression hardened. You don't understand. Humans are a disease spreading through our galaxy. Your obsession with integrating them into our society will destroy everything we've built. The only disease I see is your bigotry, Livia countered. Surrender now. It's over. Taryn's hand moved toward his weapon. It's not over until... David fired first, but Taryn was surprisingly fast for his size. The shot grazed his shoulder as he lunged forward, tackling David with the full force of his massive body. They crashed into a console, sparks flying as equipment shattered beneath them. Terran was incredibly strong, his alien physiology giving him advantages that David's human muscles couldn't match. But David had something Terran didn't: years of combat experience against superior forces. As they grappled, David used Terran's momentum against him, redirecting the alien's strength rather than opposing it directly. It was a human technique that the security chief clearly hadn't encountered before. Livia tried to help, but Terran lashed out with one long arm, sending her sprawling across the room. The sight of her falling ignited something primal in David, a protective fury that focused his combat instincts to razor sharpness. He broke Terran's hold and delivered a series of precise strikes to vulnerable points on the alien's anatomy. Pressure points that worked across most species. Terran staggered back, momentarily stunned by the effectiveness of the attack. But the security chief wasn't finished. With a roar of rage, he drew a concealed blade and charged. David sidestepped, but not quite fast enough. The blade sliced across his side, cutting through his uniform and into flesh. David barely felt the pain, adrenaline flooding his system as he continued the fight. He caught Terran's wrist on the next strike, twisting until the blade clattered to the floor. Then he delivered a devastating combination of blows that finally brought the massive alien to his knees. As Terran swayed, dazed but still conscious, Livia approached with her weapon trained on him. "You betrayed everything we stand for," she said coldly. "And for what? Fear of change? They'll never truly integrate," Terran spat. "Humans are too human, too emotional, too unpredictable too willing to dive into garbage chutes to save someone they barely know?" Livia interrupted, her eyes flicking briefly to David. "Too ready to risk their lives for principles? Those don't sound like flaws to me." Before Terran could respond, loyal security personnel flooded the room, taking the traitor into custody. Only then did David allow himself to acknowledge the burning pain in his side. He pressed a hand against the wound, feeling warm blood seeping between his fingers. "You're hurt," Livia said, suddenly at his side, concern replacing the cold fury that had dominated her expression moments before. "It's not deep," David assured her, though the room had begun to spin slightly. "Just a scratch." "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered, guiding him to a chair. "Medical team to the security hub immediately," she commanded into the communication system. As the adrenaline ebbed, David became more aware of the wound and of Livia's gentle hands as she examined it, carefully cutting away the fabric of his uniform. "So much for the janitor's outfit," he joked weakly. "I think you've graduated beyond janitorial duties," she replied, her voice soft as she applied pressure to the wound. "Though I must say you filled out that uniform rather impressively." Despite the pain, David felt a surge of warmth at her words and at the tender concern in her eyes. "Are you flirting with me while I'm bleeding, Ms. Navarex?" "Perhaps." A smile touched her lips. "My species believes that near-death experiences heighten emotional honesty." "And what emotions are you being honest about?" David asked, his voice rougher than intended. Livia's eyes met his, all professional pretense gone. "That I've never met anyone like you, human or otherwise." The medical team arrived then, efficiently treating David's wound with advanced healing technology that sealed the cut and accelerated tissue regeneration. Throughout the procedure, Livia remained by his side, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Reports flowed in from throughout the building. The mercenaries had been contained, the hegemony conspirators arrested, the danger neutralized. Livia handled each update with calm efficiency, but her eyes frequently returned to David. When they were finally alone again, Livia helped David to his feet. "The executive suite has been secured. You should rest properly while you recover." "Is that an invitation?" David asked, searching her face. "It's whatever you want it to be," she replied softly. "You've earned any reward I can offer." David reached out, gently touching her cheek. "I don't want a reward, but I do want you." The directness of his statement, so typically human, brought a deeper blue flush to her cheeks. "Even though I'm not human, our cultures, our biologies, they're different." "Different doesn't mean incompatible," David said, drawing her closer. I think we've proven that today. In the privacy of the executive elevator taking them to her suite, Livia finally allowed herself to melt into his embrace. Their lips met in a kiss that bridged the gap between their species, different in texture and temperature, but matching in passion and need. Later, as they lay entwined in the soft expanse of her bed, the differences between them became points of fascination rather than division. David traced the subtle patterns in her blue skin, marveling at how it seemed to glow from within under his touch. Livia explored the scars that mapped his human history, each one a story of survival. "What happens now?" David asked as dawn broke over the city skyline visible through the suite's panoramic windows. Livia propped herself up on one elbow, her white hair cascading freely over her shoulders. "That depends. Does the hero want to return to his mop and bucket?" David laughed, pulling her closer. "I think the hero might be ready for a new challenge." "Good," she said, reaching for a data tablet on the bedside table, "because I have a proposition for you." She handed him the tablet, which displayed a contract, not for janitorial services, but for the position of Chief Security Advisor to the CEO. "You want to hire me?" David asked, surprised. "I want to keep you," Livia corrected, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "Professionally and personally. Is that something a human male might be interested in?" David set the tablet aside and pulled her into another kiss. "This human male is definitely interested. But I have one condition." Livia raised an eyebrow. "Which is no hidden clauses on page 94, he said with a grin. Her laughter filled the room, bright and genuine, nothing like the controlled corporate persona she showed the world. "Deal," she agreed, sealing their arrangement with another kiss. As the sun rose fully over the galactic capital, casting golden light across their intertwined forms, David reflected on how a simple warning, "Don't sign that contract," had changed everything. Sometimes he thought the most important contracts weren't written on paper at all, but in the promises exchanged between hearts, regardless of the color of the skin that contained them.